as any artist does, you begin to notice patterns and resonances and things that are trying to connect inwardly first before they can connect outwardly first. And of course, mediumship is all about connecting in some kind of a way. And also, in my experience, everyone has mediumship tendencies or whatever you want to call it, but you have these tendencies of communicating, sharing, and exchanging all kinds of information, whether it's artistic or musical or literature or poetry, whatever, it's inspiration, it's in spirit. You're sort of doing that. So I don't want, um, uh, I have a lot of art training since I was 6 years old with some very advanced teachers now that I look back. And for some reason, they were, they wouldn't take on students, but they took on me for some reason. So I watched them and absorbed, because when you're a small child, you're sort of watching how the adults are doing things that you're more conscious of what they're doing than they're conscious of what they're doing. And then I noticed that certain artists I worked with kind of went into an altered state of some kind or a non-ordinary state of consciousness, not necessarily trance. And anyone who's sort of been in communities of artists would probably get that right away and understand what I'm talking about. So if you can understand that, at least you're well on your way to being receptive to all kinds of things, whether it's you're just out walking in the woods and you're receptive to the spirits of birds and the wind and the breezes somehow are communicating to you and they inspire you to try to communicate back by producing an image. It's all part of it. And it was happening with me way before I was aware of what was happening. One of my fine arts studio degrees, the teacher was one of my mentors in so many ways and still is. And I, unlike everyone else there, I was beginning to produce abstract expressionist art, but it had patterns to it and it spoke to people and had hidden things in it that I didn't intend. And that was sort of my response to it, because when I stopped responding to everyone around me, looking at what they were doing or what they weren't doing, or looking at books, when I just forgot about everyone else and got into that silent state that you get into, it's almost like something was using my hands with the brush and the paints and making, and so it felt very courageous and crazy at the same time. And my teacher responded in such a positive way, whereas the other students were kind of weirded out by it, but he absolutely loved it. And so that kind of encouragement, that validation, is also part of the process. As you know, I recently retired, so to speak, as a psychotherapist of 35 years or more. And so now I have much more time to return to my painting. And so I started returning to my painting 2 years ago as I was titrating or transitioning down from the practice. And um, as a medium, I've had a lot of experiences formally and informally, when I was a child and an adult, with what people might like to call nature spirits. There's a big difference between connecting with nature spirits and producing art with them than there is with someone who's not a nature spirit, like a human being who was a human being. There's a big difference in that. So when I started painting again, the nature spirits that I'm always in touch with are extremely playful, like little children, and very curious and like to play tricks and do all kinds of things. They just like to get very messy. And unlike human beings who maybe are in spirit, they don't ask for permission. Like, can I come forward or do this? They just come in and do whatever they want. And I was perfectly happy with that. And so I started reproducing what looked like abstract images, but they were very complex and they took days to do in a medium that I was very familiar with, which was watercolor. And somehow they led me to look through an old drawer, and I found some old inks from Paris that were scented inks, very old. And I'd use them, to write romantic letters and things back in the days. And so I was using it. And then the smell of the ink was so invigorating and the colors were so intense that I started using more and more ink rather than watercolor. And and I didn't want to ruin my brushes with ink because I didn't know very much about ink, which is very different. So I started using little laboratory pipettes that you kind of squeeze and pick up. And so all of my work, which you look, hardly any of it, none of it is with brushes, which might be hard to believe. And this was a medium that the spirits were able to really get into because water is so hard to control. You're just working with water and air, and ink is mostly water and dye. And just like trying to be a medium, like you can't control this stuff, it just flows. And so somehow the water became a medium with a medium in some way. And just so for me, that was a natural way of just producing it. And it went on for maybe a year, produced quite a lot of stuff as my familiarity with the materials grew and techniques came out of it, and I had to discover all kinds of new materials and techniques and paper and tape and blow dryers and all kinds of things that just took a long time to do, very involved in it. And one day, as I was just working on some of it, very intense and focused in that way, I I felt something very different, that it was a person, a human in spirit who was noticing me, who had noticed, like was attracted to the work and was noticing it. And I could feel them noticing it. And at first he was quite confused in some certain ways. So this is William Hurt, the actor, right? And whom I have always had an extremely deeply affection for. And we have a lot of similarities in our love for all things French, and also what I just, this is sort of jumping ahead, what I have discovered so far is that the person in spirit who connects with me somehow has or has had a connection with me in some way when they were here on earth. So I still don't know what that connection with him is. It could be with one of his kids or someone living in Manhattan for as long as I do. You always have the sixth degree of connection with someone, like, everyone knows Kevin Bacon, that kind of thing. So it could be very well that. But we resonated. And he's also a Pisces as well. And so we just resonated very much. And he had always wanted to do art. He actually did paintings, which people don't know too much about. And so I invited him. I said, so let's see what we can do. And so as a subject, we chose, and this is my guides also were very much a part of this. And so they said, we'll set the stage. We actually helped him come through, and we're going to make some suggestions as how to proceed in terms of subject matter. And so this will help him because, as I said before, he was kind of confused still. This is only maybe a year after his transition, which had been very, very painful. And he had tried to resist drugs because he was sober, which could be because I've been sober for a couple of decades. So that could also be our connection as well, too. So it was decided that he would try to express what he experienced during his transition, that there were stages. We sort of put it up in stages because he couldn't remember anything. But then and he was afraid to go back in and explore it. And so his guides are saying, well, so this art will help him go back and explore it. And you are supporting him by kind of still your connection to earth in a certain way. And so we produce these incredible pieces of art for me, quite small, maybe no bigger than 6 by 9 inches on watercolor paper, but with just inks. And and he titled them in French, which my French is not so great. So it took me a while to figure out what he was saying, but like poetry, just beautiful titles that he gave it to experience. And we painted his pain, we painted his confusion, we painted his awakening, we painted his awareness of his surroundings as he woke up. And this is all this helped him a great deal, as many. And it also opened up a lot of channels for me, and it began to attract other people who were well-known best friends in my life that had transitioned early in life, and they were all artists. And so one was an actor, and one was a painter. And so finally they stepped forward and they said, we want to do this too. And so we produced a series with them as well.